At CSX, what we've been going through is this journey of enterprise asset management, transforming ourselves, frankly, from the way we maintained assets into this new enterprise asset management that was just spoken about. For us, really important. Why? We're a very heavy asset company. We're in the service sector. We have 41 kinds of locomotives, 4,300 of them. By the way, they cost about $2.5 million, starting at 15, $3.5 million. 185,000 rail cars, and literally tens of thousands of pieces of equipment, signals, rail yards, bridges, tunnels, facilities, shop equipment, heavy equipment. In fact, if you look at our assets, they really vary in complexity and scope. We categorize our assets into 12 groupings. They total over 1 million assets that we have to maintain and repair every year. If we had to replace them all tomorrow, it'd be north of $50 billion. We spend $1.5 billion a year repairing and maintaining. And we invest about $2 billion a year. A little bit of it's new build for growth, but most of it's end-of-life replacement. A lot of money. Who are we? Well, we're a transportation company operating on the East Coast. We're the largest East Coast railroad, but we're also a transportation company. 32,000 employees, 27,000 mainline miles, 36,000 total track miles. 12 billion, 6.4 million carloads, and we also operate intermodal terminals, automotive terminals, bulk distribution terminals, and we either operate or serve over 70 ports in the Gulf of Mexico and the East Coast. We are a company that's got a real tradition of delivering value. Over the last 10 years, we've undergone a tremendous transformation. I'll be honest, we were a mediocre company in 2000. We were a company who was providing service levels to our customers in the 20 and 30 percentiles. I mean, miserable. It was essentially, what did we want to do, what did you need, not what you needed. And so we've been undergoing this transformation. And as a result, we're now the safest North American railroad. Our customer satisfaction is measured by J.D. Powers in the service space routinely. In fact, it's almost always exceeds truck service levels now. And we often beat our competitors in this business in terms of the product we're delivering. And more importantly, for our stakeholders and our Wall Street stockholders, analysts, we have been delivering value year over year. Now, the point of sharing these facts with you isn't to be overly proud. What it's done is we've reduced the variation in our processes. We could not have moved toward asset management as a company if we were still providing that lousy service, because we were too busy fighting fires all the time. As we reduced the variation in the processes, as we have changed and evolved to becoming a service-oriented company, we aspire often to, and we refer to the UPS folks as where we want to get to. Right? At the end of the day, they figured it out, 99-point-something% on-time delivery. That's where we aspire to as well as a company. And so for us to do that, we had to earn the right to transform. And we believe we've done that. And so starting in around 2010, after we delivered all this value, and I might add in this process $1.3 billion of productivity to the bottom line through Lean, Six Sigma, TQM, some basic continuous improvement methods. We began to understand coming out of the terrible recession of 2009, which actually was pretty good for my business. I mean, we were one of the few industries where the recession actually was a good thing, and we had great financial results. But we came out of that realizing the low-hanging fruit's gone, realizing that this orientation toward the customer wasn't something that was a one-time, it was the beginning of the journey. And so, as we started doing our 5- and 10-year planning, we started to realize, hey, where are we going to? And we did a lot of benchmarking. We went to many companies and visited their senior management teams and asked them where were they and how did they get there? Where did they see themselves going? And we came back and we concluded very, very simply and obviously, hey, we need to keep doing what we've been doing with this focus toward the customer. And so we've branded it as service excellence, fairly common term in the service space. But what's different about service excellence is, yeah, it's got all the commercial stuff about business retention and profitability, but for the first time, managing assets came to the forefront. The asset managers, it became realized that they were a key part of the solution to grow our business and provide better service, right? So for the first time, we had a chair at the table. I bet in many of your businesses, the asset facility infrastructure aspects, I bet budgets have been flat. I bet your idea of being at the table is when there's a problem, not a success, right? That's where we were up until a few years ago, and we've begun the transition. And it was this focus towards service was the key reason. So our goal today is, why did we make the journey? How are we making the journey? And where are we in terms of results and in that journey? And that's what we want to share with you. Because I believe that our company struggled for a long time in the maintenance and asset repair space. And it was because it was in the back of the visibility. It was because it wasn't a key part of the company's strategic vision of where it wanted to go. And as a continuous improvement professional, as a strategist, my job was to tee that up with some other people in my organization and some other parties, and to sell that to the organization and win that alignment. And we've been successful in doing that as a team. Historically, asset management in my company meant, and I bet in yours, buy more, right? Build more, or maybe just replace what's already worn out. That was the definition of asset management, right? Well, in the new business that we're seeing, asset management is all about how do you get more out of same? How do you maximize asset efficiency? And what we've done is we've organized it around 4 areas that make sense for our business. But one of the ahas in this whole process for us was we had been managing each of these assets in a functional organization, and the functional organizations weren't really talking to each other. And we clearly were not oriented toward the customer. That UPS, FedEx, Google, Amazon, whatever company you want to talk about in the Fortune 50, they're all aligned toward the customer. And so what we've done is we've taken these 4 areas and we've aligned them toward our customer. Now, as we began the journey, and we really started very insightfully looking at where we were and what we were doing, we found a lot of organizational challenges, and I bet many of you share the same. We had a very mature asset base, literally tens of thousands of pieces of equipment that were at or beyond life cycle, right? That's a tough spot to be. We also realized very quickly that our management information was wonderful to get to where we got, but it was useless to get to where we wanted to go. The other problem was everybody in my business is retiring. We hired in the 70s. I got hired on in 82, one of 3 trainee programs, and then I stopped for another 10 years. I'm one of the young ones in my company, and I'm 56. Everybody is retiring. And in fact, in our business, it's expected that over half of all the employees in the rail industry will retire in the next 7 years. So if you've got children, think about us. Civil engineering degrees, electrical engineering degrees, and as you'll hear me talk, industrial engineering degrees. Think about the rail space because it is a growth opportunity. But the challenge there is what? Retention of knowledge, right? These people in our business, you tend to stay for the distance. 30, 40 years, 50 years is not uncommon. As we become very insightful, what we learned was when we asked how do we produce that level of reliability or efficiency? What we learned was we didn't have any work standards anymore. They had deteriorated over the years because of mergers and consolidations, and that we were basically managing by was tribal knowledge. And in fact, it was even worse than that. It was, what did you do last year minus some percent? It wasn't plus some percent. It usually was minus. I can't do more because, right? You'd hear that story constantly. Our measures were very high level. The measures were about distribution and in our service product. It wasn't about asset management, asset reliability, asset quality, a little about asset utilization. And we literally had tens of people whose only job was to drill data because they had to become a specialist. It took years to teach them how to code Focus. Anybody know what Focus is? Nobody uses that stuff anymore. I mean, you go to India for those sort of services now. It's core, it has been core, and it's still core competencies in my company. Of course, like everybody else, costs are rising. And what we realize is that if we didn't change, and if we didn't make managing assets a strategic objective, if we didn't make managing assets a strategic objective to improve our service product, to get growth, we were going to have to spend ungodly amounts of capital in order to just keep up. We couldn't sustain that. And those phenomenal results that Wall Street's seeing out of us wouldn't keep coming. So the challenges were across the board for us: people, processes, information systems. We were asking the right questions in our meetings, right? We were asking questions about reliability and utilization. But what we came to realize in our journey was that those questions didn't give a context for understanding a lot of things. Like, how does this maintenance relate to what the customer wants? What level of reliability do they want? And what can we afford to give to them? It certainly didn't answer the question of what's good. I got a question for each of you. Up until 2010, I did not know what good reliability and good utilization levels were for any of my asset groups. Do you? I mean, I think we all want 100%. You can't afford it. Nobody wants 0%. But where is that right level? So we undertook to understand what is good and to link those activities day to day to long term and obviously deal with the measurement issues we had. And so fundamentally, we were asking three really simple questions as part of our asset journey. How well does it work? How often do I use it? And what does it cost me to use? Unbelievably simple. And yet the whole asset management story at CSX had been overly complicated. It took financial analysts and strategists and lots of budget people to be able to talk about asset management in our company. You boil it down into three simple contexts. Everybody down to the shop floor can get it. That person who owns 10 feet and knows more about that 10 feet on a shop floor space than anybody else gets these three things. And so we also started looking at, insightfully, how good are we? And I have to tell you, it was a painful part of our journey, because what we found, despite incredible financial success, service product going from the 30s into the 80s, safety dramatically going down, and I mean dramatically. We're at something like 10% of where we were when I started in the railroad, 10% injuries compared to back then. What we realize is locomotives are being used 40% of the time. Rail cars have 2 weeks cycle time. Call that 13% utilization kind of numbers. Our workforce wrench time was only about 23%. Now remember, I told you, we were producing incredible financial results. And so what we learned in this journey was not only is this about service and growth, but oh my God, you put some percentage and dollars to that. I can't show you that obviously because of insider issues. But the bottom line is, it's not just about revenue, it's about costs. And literally hundreds and hundreds of $millions of opportunities that have been sitting that we hadn't been taking advantage of. We hadn't been good stewards for. Now, a lot of companies, in fact, at breakfast this morning, the question was asked to me, so what happened? Well, 10 years ago, I think people would have started getting fired. And the cultural change that's occurred in my company, as part of this service focus, is truly, the question isn't who caused this, the question is what are you going to do about it? And so what we're going to do about it is this strategic enterprise asset management. And when we talk about strategic asset management, there's a lot of misnomers. I mean, just the way you described it earlier, so I've got to calibrate with the new ISO because we're the complete opposite of the way you explained it. So I've got to turn that around. But as we think about the business environment we're operating in this 10-year period, it has dramatically changed. I am and have been always a coal hauler. That's how we made our bread and butter. Coal's down 50% in the last year. It's been replaced by intermodal, automotive, and this new business called fracking and fuel oils. Huge growth area. What we've learned is business is more volatile, it's more uncertain, it's more unforgiving. And what we also realize is in our transformation in asset management, we had to go beyond work order systems. Right? We had to move to smart asset management, which really, and I'm stealing from the IBM folks badly here, but I embrace these. You have to become more intelligent, more interconnected, more instrumented, more optimized. That's what the new asset management strategy is about, right? And so for us, it was about moving from an asset operator into becoming an asset optimizer. And that is our enterprise asset management journey to deliver better service, to deliver better growth. And so in 2010, we went in front of our chairman and executive team and proposed that enterprise asset management needed to become a strategic objective because it was so instrumental and so integrated with service and growth. And it was because the notion of it's not just about the assets, it's about the service these assets provide. And that was a new way of thinking. The good news is they embraced it, and we began a path, and our path was real simple. Again, very, very boiled down, simple, anybody can understand it. You got to build the tools. You got to establish the vision of what's good. Where are you trying to get to? We were busy working hard. We didn't know what our destination was. We actually had one asset group where we'd already gotten past where we needed to be. Right? We didn't really need to focus on that anymore. And then the cultural changes and solutions needed to move our organization from where we were to where we wanted to be. The first part of that journey was real easy, and that's why I'm here as part of the Maximo kickoff. We entered in, after a lot of analysis and assessments, we went down the Maximo solution choice several years ago. We currently have 2 operationalized systems on our assets in the locomotive space and in the facility space. And we've got 3 major instances of Maximo underway in our other spaces. So we're building up, and then we're going to build them together. And as I said, what we learned was in this journey that Maximo was all about engagement. It was all about getting management commitment and accountability to get those business results. And so other speakers today are going to talk about the Maximo tool and how to use it. My lesson learned is don't make it a work order system. Make it a smart business intelligence system. The next piece of the vision was more difficult for us. How do you define what's good? How do you change the culture? And what we realized after kind of messing around in this area for several months was we didn't really have the right skills and competencies in our organization. And so we began a journey, and that journey was looking for a company, and we landed with a company after interviewing over 20 consulting companies by the name of Argo, who had the background and more importantly, that shop floor perspective we were looking for, who had worked and had demonstrated experience in asset utilization and value analysis and maintenance practices, and more importantly, had worked in our space and many, many other spaces. So the interesting piece of what we're now going to do is I'm going to introduce James Morfettis, Senior VP of Argo, who has entered into a partnership with us, and we're going to have a little dialogue and a little conversation for you. Right? So that's kind of the interactive piece of this. James, when you came to our company, we asked you to just come in and visit a couple of our facilities and our service locations and tell us what you thought relative to this vision of asset management. Where were we on the continuum?
Yeah, so John a few years back had asked us to go into some of their heavy asset facilities, locomotives, and some other areas, infrastructure track, And a couple of things that we found out related to reliability, utilization, and unit cost, because that was a structure that we measured and did our gap assessment, we went in, for example, into the locomotive asset arena. And what we realized when it came to reliability is when we interviewed 19 key managers in the organization across the network, is that there wasn't a really clear understanding of the condition of that asset. Typically, it was more, it wasn't asset-based condition, it was more failure-based results. So when things failed at that point, then it alarmed the organization. If locomotives and trains were failing at that point, the question always asked why. But never that it was very clear on how well that asset was operating through the network over time, from when it was acquired to maintain to overhaul to its end of life. So that was one key point. Second was, based on the reliability, there was a disconnect that appeared between engineering and quality. So what was happening was engineering was working more on how to optimize fuel, how to buy the next locomotive. But when it came to what kind of feedback and information the shops and service centers needed, it was unclear back to the shop and service centers. And when we asked the 19 people or so that we interviewed, we said, how do you measure reliability? And every single one of them had a different answer, not only on how it was measured, but what that answer was. And so what we realized, there was no simplified measure of reliability. The second key point related to utilization was when we asked, maybe interviewed 30 or so different groups in the organization regarding on how well the asset's utilized, well, guess what? We had 30 different answers, and we were operating with the railroad 100-some years old. And so being outsiders coming in, the simple question was, what percent of the time is that asset really doing what it's supposed to be doing? And that's where the clarity was lacking. The third thing, when it came to unit costs, during our interviews, we asked the question, what does it cost to maintain this asset? And guess how many different answers we got? As many people as we interviewed, correct? Does that occur in your organization? I don't know. But that's what we found out in this industry. So based on reliability, utilization, unit cost, there was a lack of clarity. All good people, all hardworking people, some of the top industry experts in the world. But they couldn't answer those three questions about reliability, utilization, and unit cost. If you don't mind, Jim. So we came up with 3 recommendations because, you can't come up with 100 recommendations. No one can understand it and do anything about it. But we came up with 3. The first being, let's understand what is good and what is not good. So thanks to John and his organization, they wanted an outside-in perspective. They said, we don't want to know how our railroad peers are doing. We already know that, or we think we know that at least, right? Because some of those people, we all share each other in the industry. The guy over here used to work for NS, then he worked for UP, and now he's with us at CSX. They wanted an outside-in perspective. So that required benchmarking, looking at other heavy asset industries to understand that. But before we could benchmark, we had to answer the question, how well is your asset performing? So in the 4 key major areas for assets that we grouped, locomotive, T&E with train and engine, which is crew, car cycle, which is the rail cars, how they're being processed, and then the infrastructure, which is the track, how well do we utilize the track. We had to come up with a simple answer that the maintenance guy on the track can understand, as well as the CEO and everybody in between. So we just simply converted the assets into time. And if we looked at 168 hours in a week, right, that's one asset, and you multiplied it by how many assets you have, you can now convert performance to time. And so what this simple measure is really what percent of the time is that asset performing what it's supposed to be doing. Any other time, it's not. And quite frankly, everybody had a good answer on why they couldn't pull freight, or why the track couldn't get utilized, or why cars weren't moving, or why the crews were sitting, not on trains. But nobody, and everybody had a great answer for it, but nobody could say, what are we doing to change that? Because their projects and priorities were focused in a 24-hour cycle how to run the business. And so by creating this simple measure about asset performance and identifying the key time loss buckets that impact utilization reliability, quite frankly, who cares about all your answers? You're not pulling freight and you're not making money. So this is where we started the journey. And when we asked, for example, in one of the assets, locomotives, we asked during these interviews, where are most of the locomotives, why are locomotives not moving? And 99% said, they're always breaking down in the shops. But the reality is, if you look in the bar on the left, that's not true. They were good locomotives, just taking too long to be processed in terminals. And that, to everyone's belief, once we proved and had credible information to show that, they finally all agreed, you know what, you're right. And for 100 years, they always thought it was locomotives breaking down, and that was causing the biggest problems on how their fleet size had to be. And in fact, it wasn't. So if you would, Jen. So we had to then, once everybody understood the simple measure, then we had to say, they asked us, give us an outside perspective from different heavy asset industries like Caterpillar, Southwest we did, UPS. We said, what's different? And so we used that measure based on other benchmark studies we've done with our research arm at a university that we're paired with. And we came to say that the railroad industry operates around a 30-35% asset utilization when it comes to locomotives. As John pointed out earlier, 23% on crews being utilized, about 10 to 12% of cars actually moving, getting freight, from point A to point B. And the track was only being utilized 20 to 22% of the time. So if you think 26,000 miles of track, all of it's got to be maintained. So you're really just, the 80% you're maintaining is barely even being used. And so when you look at things that way, it makes the leadership think differently.
And so I'll add, when we saw this for the first time, the natural reaction might have been, oh my God, are we lousy, right? Oh, woe is me, right? But what we actually did was we took a look at this and said, hey, there's hope. You know why? Guess where automotive was in the 70s? Guess where airlines were in the 80s? They were down at that other end when we're at. So it really told us that this was doable because other industries had gone through a similar transformation.
Absolutely. And so the second question was, again, what are other asset companies doing? So we went through the benchmarking process and studied best practices. And really it's tied to what John had earlier. It's about interconnecting the assets, right? Instrumentalizing the assets, understanding how they're measured, optimizing the assets. And that's what other companies are doing, the best companies, when we did our benchmark studies. For example, related to utilization, capacity-driven shops to do repairs. Know what's coming at you ahead of time and route it accordingly to where you have capacity. ETAs based on real network conditions, because conditions change. When you look at reliability, condition-based maintenance, everybody talks about it, but the reality is, how do you make that happen, right? And so you have to start somewhere, and typically that's in your shops and service centers and making sure you control the quality and understanding what you're releasing out into the network. And 3, unit cost. There's been, in the past, 2 factions. Here's how much money we spend on capital. Here's how much money we spend on operating expense. But to us, it doesn't matter. It's how much does that unit cost to process, agnostic of whether it's capital or operating expense. And so that's the journey that John has started with his team and has progressed now where we have improved utilization because we understand what utilization is. We understand what reliability is and where it needs to be because we've created now a vision and a benchmark of where we want to be. And then also at the unit cost, really understand what it costs to process, to operate the track, to maintain it, to process crews, to process and move cars, to process and move locomotives.
And this was important for us because we very quickly understood we didn't want to become the best rail transportation provider. We want to become the best service provider. So having this benchmark information, it confirmed the journey. And it also, if you see a lot of those words, it confirmed the whole notion of SMART. Maximo is a tool, not as a work order management system, but as a smart business intelligence, right? And so again, it kind of confirmed that the strategy and path we'd set forth was right.
Now, how do we get everybody aligned as an organization, because that's everybody says, you know, nobody's on board, nobody's aligned. And we all have the right answers individually, but collectively it's hard to pool 32,000 people together, right, in a traditional culture. So we had to create a shared vision. So 3 things we did. 1, the gap analysis again. When we went into each of the 4 major asset groups, the cars, the crews, the locomotives, and the track or infrastructure, as it's called, we said, what are the key drivers? What are the key drivers? And we took the operational people that said, what drives your business day in, day out? And from there, when we came up with the key drivers, we defined attributes. And then what we said is those attributes for those drivers, for example, if we wanted, for locomotives, minimize the dwell of the locomotive. Or for cars, keep them moving. Like, what are some key drivers, right? And then we said, what are other industries doing at the attribute level? And then once we had kind of a localized understanding at the field level on, hey, this is what a different industry does on the shop floor or out in the field in the track, then people can relate to it. But it started with that gap analysis. Second of all, we built a shared vision. So we showed videos. We had a series of workshops with the middle level and top level management at CSX in each of those asset groups. And from there, we took all the attributes and the drivers and we had everybody vote and filter and flush and debate and argue and walk out of the room and scream and yell until a point we all came up with agreement. And after a few months of that, and us still being employed as consultants, working through the difficulty of managing egos, right, in the politics, we came up with a shared vision. And then because now we have the simplified measure of utilization, reliability, unit cost, we can now say, let's go chase that vision, and we can measure it as we progress.
And so together, and what he's not showing you is a lot of industrial engineering studies that literally gave us the hard facts of how good our processes and assets were. The combination of that and their game book that they had laid out in terms of the shared vision, we went forward and started working together to improve assets and to make asset management a strategic initiative.
Correct. So you can't see it because of the art, but it's an arrow going up. And so what we created is a 2020 vision, roughly a 8 to 10 year vision. And we said the reality is, so API is that asset performance index, and this is the 32%, 35 going up. We said we want to get to where the trucking industry is 10 years from now. If we could do that, that's worth beyond hundreds of millions of dollars in actual operating expense and capital offset. And we did the math. It's very clear. So what we said is the first thing we need to do is put some foundational events in. How can we really know how an asset's performing until we have some kind of standardization? How do we know if it's efficient or not or effective? So we had tribal knowledge before, as John mentioned earlier, but we didn't have baseline measures of, you know, are people doing the work they're even supposed to do? And then from there we said, really, part of our vision is to get to that capacity-driven scheduling so that locomotive automatically knows where to get routed when it's next service interval, instead of people having to manage it and sending too many one place and too few another and underutilizing that facility. And then 3, really, the significant API impact would really be, because a key measure in railroad is network velocity, speed of the network, is really having a cultural base driven, everyone shared driven, all 32,000 employees on the vision. And then secondly, really having that we thought from an asset base, there's different reliability centered management, call it what you want, condition-based management. If we have condition-based management, we have utilization as being a key measure to get the assets moving. What you realize at the end of the day, you don't need nearly 40%, anywhere between 25 to 40% of the assets that you currently possess and have to maintain. You don't even need them. You're over-processing.
So enough with the preamble, James. Let's get in and show them how we work together and actually got the job started and where we're at.
Correct. So we took our basic unit of measure and we said, how do we translate that into work? What do people need to do? And what we developed with the teams collaboratively are what we call work streams. Work streams being a collection of projects, a key theme of what we need to do to go drive that time loss. And it took several months to get to that point. Out of there's there's 300 or 400 projects. But the key thing what this really benefited us is what we did is we canvassed all the projects the company's working on, and we realized maybe 5 to 8% of them they were all good projects, all good things for the company, but only 5 to 8% of them were related to actually improving the asset, either reliability, unit cost, or utilization of that asset. 5 to 8%. So everybody's activity and work was here, 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 not unified, right, to improve that asset utilization. From there, we went into the shops, and that's where we started. We happened to just go in the locomotive shop because that's where we were asked to go first. And really, we said, how do we do this at the shop floor level? And us being industrial engineers, mechanical engineers, I've been a Ford Motor Company superintendent running a final assembly line. I've worked with union environment, and that's who we are. That's the makeup of our company. And we said, really, there's 3 key things we need to do. It's not just change the physical layout of the equipment and the workflow. That's very important. You have to do that. But it's also what tools do you give the local management team to flow information up to make real-time decisions. And third, how do you change ultimately the culture so when we leave, this thing can keep going and improving.
And so when they started this, we kind of went, oh no, another quality initiative. But what was fundamentally different with this one, all the others had been about our management team. This one was about the people on the floor first. It was about engaging them, getting their collaboration around reliability. And that engagement truly turned out to be very transformational and the keystone to really the success that we've been seeing to date.
So we did the physical changes. We did the typical lean stuff, right, one piece full, but it was all about engagement of the craft. So a heavily unionized environment, 6 different craft unions we were operating with. A place that was it's so old, Huntington in West Virginia, I mean, that the floor is wood and oil coming up, and it's, they were working on steam engines. That's how old this place, and typically employees are 3rd, 4th generation. Their family and grandpa and great-grandpa all worked there. You took that environment and you start respecting what they know, and you put it on a wall and you say, what is the best way to overhaul this locomotive? And when we engaged them that way, oh my, what unleashed the knowledge. And I realized that's the best workforce I've ever known in all the years in a union environment. The best workforce, when you unleash what they know.
So in this process, another aha moment for us was understanding that it isn't about just Maximo, it isn't about just having strategy, it isn't just about industrial engineering. We also had to back up what we were talking about with shop investment. Improve shop tools. These folks were using 1920, 24, 1940 pieces of shop equipment. We've brought in and are bringing in modern plasma, lasers, IR kind of technologies, new cranes to reflect the weights and types of engines that we now have. And that really became very visible to the folks on this floor and in the other shops where we're doing the same thing. Because they're going, oh, these guys are actually serious. They're spending money on us. We were fixing their building. James was out with a paintbrush painting and cleaning up their environment as you would with a normal lean 5S kind of thing. Absolutely. And that led us to the first-in-kind labor agreement in our industry consolidating 4 crafts into 1 composite mechanic because they got that we were serious about reliability and quality.
And how long did that take for that to accomplish?
3.5, 4 months.
That's it. Changed the whole operating rules with the unions because we engaged them and we're reinvesting with them. 3 to 4 months in 150-year-old unions. So the management tools, these are just some examples, but really in the top left was the industrial engineering piece where we worked with the crafts. They laid out the work tasks by craft. And just some other ones, exceptions tracking, where's the downtime. These things they typically weren't exposed to. It's kind of a job shop environment. The next thing is we established this, what we call a center of excellence. And this is what John's boss, Frank Lenegro, brought to us and said, I want to create a center of excellence. Help me understand exactly what that should mean in our industry. And really there are 4 key components of that. 1, engage all employees. All employees, number 1. 2, Develop what's critical. What are the critical success factors? In a lot of your cases, it's as simple as safety, quality, delivery, cost, morale, attendance, whatever you want to call it, leadership, ownership. Create a baseline, okay? 3, create a maturity evolution. So where are we today in terms of safety and maturity, and what are the attributes that are related to that? And where we want to be on our vision out here to a level 5. And let's evaluate ourselves, management team, and be hard on ourselves to see if we're really progressing. Because now they have a vision, right, of what does it mean to have a center of excellence? Well, we laid it out in steps for them. And we wrote it with them. Knowing our knowledge, we wrote it with them. And then the 4th thing is build a quality culture. So CSX has the ultimate safety culture I've ever known in any organization that I've been exposed to. Building a quality culture has accelerated so quickly. We have craft people on third trick emailing me every day, are the true disciples of wanting their shops to be the best in the world. Craft people, craft labor people driving this initiative. It's unbelievable. In fact, now we earned the right to rebuild locomotives over 5 years, and the crafts have to actually sign off on that locomotive, and they're going to put a sign saying, here's where it came from with our name on it. That's how they feel. In only a year and a half, we've changed that culture. A year and a half. Okay, next. And so I have to ask you, John, all this salesmanship as a consulting firm that we do, was there any value?
10% discount, right?
Wait, I think you said 5. Oh. Okay, it's 10 now. What is the true value creation? How does it relate to the EAM journey?
So I always struggle with this question about, so how well are we doing as a result of this? And the struggle is because we've begun a journey which is not a 1 or 2 or 5 year journey, really. It's about a 10 or 15 or 20 year journey. UPS told us it was a 30-year journey for them when they started it. And so as I look at what's going on, we're seeing the changes in behavior of our employees and our managers. We're seeing the new tools come online through Maximo, and we are moving our existing Maximo instances to become smart, as we talked about earlier. We're getting labor agreements because of the focus on quality. We're seeing improvement. Those charts on API have improved rather substantially this year, and that improvement has resulted in bottom line value to the company as well as facilitated additional growth. So as I kind of step back and think about defining success in this space, the first part of success is we made managing assets come from the background into the forefront and be part of the key strategy for our company and how we're going to deliver service and growth. We've learned that Maximo is not the only thing out there. You've got to enhance it. You've got to increase its capabilities. There's some vendors here in this conference around deep analytics. In fact, I'm talking in this stream later today that we're doing business with and are talking to. And more importantly, it's the visible, noticeable behavior change that we've been seeing. And as a result, industrial engineering, which we literally had very few people, we are hiring lots of industrial engineers. By the way, very hard to find. We're having to go into the schools to get them. And we're rethinking the personnel skills around where we're going, not where we've been. And so we're taking advantage of the change in workforce to be able to bring those people in. So how's it going? A cautious green, right? We are transparent in this effort. We are transitioning it. We are sharing it in all our assets groups. But honestly, and the reason I really hesitate is, until we interconnect all of these strategies toward the customer, that's when it's really going to click for us. And that's where we really see the UPS and FedEx and Google and Amazon kind of companies where they've succeeded and where we see the success for us as well. But I will tell you, having been in that other environment where we were managing assets, right, and where failure mode and firefighting was the day, this is a lot more fun environment to work in. Any questions?
First off, how about a hand for these guys?